Good evening, everyone, and welcome to December's Tashkeel Talk. My name is Lisa Borlechka, and I'm the Deputy Director of Tashkeel. This week in the UAE, we're hosting the World Conference on Creative Economy in the only UNESCO City of Design in the Middle East North Africa region, Dubai. Now, Tashkeel is delighted to be participating in this event, which comes at the end of a very special year. It's the end of UNESCO's International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. So we have a suitably appropriate Tashkeel talk for you today. Jonathan Ashmore, who is going to share his unique approach to design and architecture that embodies a sustainable and community-focused approach. Now, Jonathan is the founder and principal architect of the award-winning RIBA Chartered Practice ANARCHITECT, based in both Dubai and London. A practicing architect and a very active design critic, he has won the international interest of design-conscious clientele thanks to his refined approach and contemporary aesthetics. Now, with a signature style of translating architecture across diverse scales of design with superlative craft, detail, and materiality. Together with his team, Jonathan continues to push the boundaries of architectural discourse to deliver projects that are at the very crux of understated luxury and contextually modern architecture. His work has gained international recognition through invited creative collaborations with Burberry, Wallpaper magazine, and many other projects, which has been published in the Global Design Press. Now, Tashkeel is similarly, like Jonathan, committed to sustainable design practices. Firstly, UAE-made design, because we are a nation of highly skilled. Just need to mute somebody. UAE-made design. Tashkeel is investing in that and nurturing our designers here in Nad Al Shibah to manufacture and fabricate right on our doorstep. If you want to know more, please visit make.works and visit the UAE portal there. Secondly, we're using the wealth of organic and natural materials the UAE has to offer in developing new materials right here in the UAE. And also, Tashkeel is the home of Precious Plastic Dubai. And together with them, we are working to repurpose, recycle, and upcycle waste material into viable, functional, affordable, and exciting designs. Now, before I hand over to Jonathan, let me give you a few normal Tashkeel Talk housekeeping rules. Firstly, this talk is being recorded and will be archived on the Tashkeel YouTube channel in a few weeks to come, I have to say. Please keep your audio on mute while Jonathan is talking. In the past, we've received choirs of cats and children. Very nice, but not necessarily the theme of our talks. Post any comments or questions you have in the chat facility while Jonathan is talking. Really, we seize the opportunity for you to pop down your ideas and your suggestions there, and we can ask Jonathan at the end, because at the end of his talk, we leap into the question and answer section where you can unmute yourselves and we can all have a really good discussion. So without further ado, let me stop sharing my screen and hand you over to Jonathan Ashmore. Hi, Jonathan.
Good evening, Lisa. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Welcome to everyone. Yeah, looking forward to just giving you a little bit of insight into how we're working as a practice around the topic of sort of sustainability, but also exploring the topics beyond sustainability and some of the actual ideas of which we've been sort of practicing and which ones have been sort of hot topic and discussion. So without further ado, I shall share my screen and run you through some projects that we'd like to discuss, and then hopefully have an engaging questions and answers afterwards. Just let me get that up. Do you see that, Lisa? Yeah, okay. Right. Okay, guys. So thank you again. So as we said, as Lisa introduced, this is Tashkeel's talk Beyond Sustainability. So a little bit of a brief about me. I'm founder and principal of Dubai and London-based Practice ANARCHITECT. We are a Dubai-based practice predominantly. I've been here since 2009. The practice has been running since 2013. So we've got well over a decade or so of experience working from Dubai as a hub, and then similarly opening our London office back in 2019. An architect is really about approach. The name an architect is sort of translating architecture across various scales, as Lisa had mentioned. So we engage in both architecture, interior architecture, and bespoke design. And with that, that really means that we're able to kind of look at the design process holistically, and within that engagement, allowing us to really understand the different levels of design in which we can intervene within projects, and then how we can kind of work collaboratively with the wider design teams to basically deliver on these sort of visions and promises of our clients, and also keeping this sort of sustainable approach all the way through from start to completion. As a practice, we try to remain very diverse, and I think we've actively kept this as a sort of a real kind of focus of our practice, so that we learn from each of these individual typologies. So from residential, hospitality, and leisure, you know, they are constantly evolving and constantly overlapping. And then looking at sort of culture, bespoke design, and workplace, as we've all seen possibly in the last 18 months to 24 months, the world has changed, and that the needs of humans across both their commercial, their homes, their residential spaces, things are transforming. And within this knowledge and this awareness about engaging across these typologies, we begin to learn more and see where we can adapt, learning from other industries and other people. So what I want to talk to you about today is it's an approach. So sustainability, not as just a word, not just as a green watch, and not just about sustaining. Sustaining means about keeping constant. We want to look at being redevelopment. We want to sort of think about essentially the post-sustainable movement. So what I want to run you through and talk you through some of our projects will be the first two projects, which will be looking at local and global context. These are projects that we've worked on predominantly from our Dubai or London studio that have not been either of those countries. The next sort of chapter is about regeneration and repurposing. This is beyond just building new. This is about bringing back to life and bringing back projects that really kind of resonate and kind of take on that sustainable notion about bringing back to life something that was previously redundant. And then the last section I'd like to talk to you about in progression is about beyond sustainability. It's about the awareness of wellness and health, and also how that, from a community point of view, from a kind of human point of view, is an important aspect of sustainability going forward. So starting with this first stage, global local context. Now, this is a project that we're actually working on. Sorry, are you seeing the slides move, Lisa?
No slides are moving.
Right, okay, sorry, let me just try and share this again. I think that's where that's not doing. 1 second. Apologies. Now can you see it? And if I flick through, can you see the change?
Yes. Hey.
Sorry about that. Okay, I will apologize. My technical thing. Let's go full screen mode and I'll flick through. Right, okay, here we go. So that's me. This is our approach. So like just summarizing, sorry, about the architecture, interior design, the typologies that we talked about, just to explain some of the projects that we're actually exploring and how we actually overlap between these different ones to sort of feed the information across them. And these are the discussions I was explaining to you guys. So hopefully that just summarizes where we're going to take this talk. So global local context. Now, this is a project in Sri Lanka that we've just completed. We've been on this project since about 2017. And I would purposely like to show this case of how we work in the process of understanding context in places that we are not based. And I think that also keeps the design fresh. It also keeps things very challenging, and it also makes you need to understand local methods of construction, local methods of materials, So this is a visual of what this hotel is. It's a very small 6-bedroom hotel on the south coast in Sri Lanka. As you can see on the bottom, we've actually got, just sort of move this, the setting is actually on the southern coast among some palm groves. And it was previously a building that was an old tsunami house that was damaged beyond repair, but with a footprint of about 170 square meters. So within this particular project, we didn't take any more land. We just decided to actually increase the height of this project to create a new connection on the south coast that was actually up amongst the palm groves. I think that's important when you're working in very different contexts is to actually understand what you're working with and who you're working for. Local methods are very important. You need to be able to kind of understand, and we very much actively understand what the building methods are. With this sort of global local approach, we're understanding what's the local knowledge, what's the local experience, but with a global perspective, we're bringing new ideas that are adaptive to the ways in which they work and challenge, but do not go beyond the actual sort of reachability of what they can achieve. So it needs to be an adaptive approach. Materiality is very important, and actually also in Sri Lanka they have abundance of certain materials, but they've also got import restrictions and so forth. So in order to be very sustainable, we're wanting to look at what materials within that part of the world are robust, readily available, and easily managed and worked upon. Interaction is very important. So I was there and my team have been there on numerous occasions going over key milestones to make sure all of our design work is translated and working very closely with the contractors and the client based over in Sri Lanka. And you can see that within that design process, you can see that the construction is very much overseen and actually followed through with what we're doing. This was also kind of key to understand the impact that we were having on the surrounding context. It was the employment of the local tradesmen. It was the employment of the local craftsmen. It was the important part of this project, but it was also important to understand the climate. This is a tropical place. So we're looking at tropical modernism. We're looking at as much natural cross ventilation as possible, as much daylight as possible to reduce the consumption of electricity, to utilize the climate, and to actually also look at where we can get this very kind of fluid cross ventilation and natural air flow through the building. Again, just showing the renders to kind of reiterate the building and its positioning on this plot, and then showing you some of the interior spaces. Now, Sri Lanka also, not just about being sustainable, but it's also about bringing the culture of the way in which these buildings work. Now, for us, from experience, it was always great within sort of going as a hospitality venture and always going to hotels there. There was always a connection with nature. There's always a connection with the outdoors, the showers, the baths, whatever you can in lots of these resorts. But we were challenged to do a building that was actually vertical on 3 stories. But the advantage of that is that we were going up into the tree line. We were going up into the sort of 45-foot high palm grove. So it gave us a unique context, not to just sort of have a views back of the small town, the ocean in front, but also the palms to the left and right. So the front ocean room was all about engaging with the full view, but then also taking this idea of what we'd seen in numerous hotels doing the research about having outdoor spaces within your own bathroom and in your own spaces. So outdoor shower, outdoor bath, something that became kind of a vernacular of Sri Lanka, a vernacular of the Sri Lankan guest and hotel experience. So we feel that that's also something that needs to be considered in a sustainable approach. It's something that's a long living character and something that is tied to that particular location. Again, bringing it to the further level of development and following this project from absolute zero, meeting with a client, creating the idea, to absolutely handing it over just a couple of days ago, is to understand working with local craftsmen. So local materials, local Nagoon wood, looking at how the joinery could be done, utilizing the titanium plaster that's very robust within wet conditions and quite sort of durable, to even making locally made furniture. So nearly all of the material, if not all, was actually locally sourced on this particular project. And these are the photographs. So these are not yet been seen before. These are just my photographs. I was there last week with a professional photographer from London, shooting this project finally after COVID and being able to get the travel restrictions lifted to travel into Sri Lanka. So it just shows the way in which this kind of detailed approach of communicating design drawings, this constant dialogue between the Dubai studio and the team on the ground in Sri Lanka, helps to bring these projects come to life, and understanding that the approach of which you consider the local context, you consider the local materiality, you make it buildable, and you make it actually achievable within what are the local means. Doesn't mean that the building has to sacrifice the quality of design or the experience. And, you know, this building, as you can see, is very open. It's open to its east and west to get the wind flow going across the coastline. We're looking at different ways in which we've got shading throughout the day, which people throughout the day can manipulate in their rooms and within the actual project itself. The staircase, as you go through, travels 3 floors up to the rooftop. Again, fully ventilated, shaded, and also protected from the heavy rains when they happen by monsoon and sun blinds. And then these are your sort of outdoor showers and your outdoor baths, which also gain the experience of something that's unique and indigenous to that type of particular hotel. And that was something we felt was important about a unique and authentic experience. And then you can see in which it's quite subtly lit in the evenings amongst the palm groves when they become almost silhouette-like. And this is just looking up at the facade. So what we were always looking at is also having a very integrated, movable facade as you were able to go up, creating these nooks where there was moments for social interaction between guests as well. So that it was very much a dynamic building that came to life with people inside it. Another project that sort of explores this idea of, you know, context of place buildings, global local approach. This is a restaurant and concept store in the Riyadh diplomatic quarter in Saudi. So this is under construction at the moment. This is a restaurant project overlooking a public park and very close to Kuwait Palace in the diplomatic quarter. Now, with this project, we wanted to explore and are exploring the usage of rammed earth. So rammed earth construction using local material, locally sourced soil, locally sourced rock, stone, and compacting that with a company from South Africa that just their people came over to direct the local team of how to do the compacting correctly for this particular one. The grid structure of this particular project is quite rigid. It's a low carbon concrete construction. So we also use thermal mass. So concrete, although is not very always considered to be a sustainable material, but it actually is robust. So we're looking at this as a longevity. And by using a low carbon concrete, saving about 45% of the actual average carbon content within concrete itself, and then creating something that's actually quite rigid, meaning that we can minimize the usage and keep the spans down to a minimum so that we can actually reduce the overall weight of the concrete needs. The infill panels are your rammed earth. Now, what that does is it creates big thermal mass, and it means that the exterior finish and the interior finish are the same. So we're not using excessive materials, and they're both beautiful and organic in their own ways, in which we are doing as well. All again locally sourced from the soil of which the site is. The outdoor spaces and the transition between indoor and outdoor spaces is important, so that we're using natural daylight to come in and light as much of the interior spaces as possible, carefully controlling these with solar blinds at different times of the day, but really also understanding and exploring from, you know, our life and times in the UAE and around the Middle East, understanding that outdoor space and outdoor time is important. That was probably never really considered, you know, not so many years ago, and now actually having outdoor space, interstitial space, going in and out, utilizing this as much as possible, particularly in the winter months, is very important. And I think that's a very sort of healthy connection with nature that needs to be explored on this. So you can see just some of the samples of what's been put together on site by the team doing the rammed earth. It's slightly different color tones based upon the actual available rock and sand and stone, just mixed with a little bit more oxide to get the color tones right. And then you can see that it's actually coming together quite nicely, and it has this really organic, unique feel to it. It has this inherent thermal mass, and this material is free. It comes from the soil and the earth of which the project is sited upon, and worked very manually with a dedicated team that know how to do this. But it's not rocket science. It's essentially form work and high compression, and saves a lot of energy and a lot of carbon versus using fully concrete or block work infill. So just moving on to the next chapter. So what we were talking about is about local place, understanding, working from abroad. So it's not just sort of importing ideas, it's working within local context and understanding what's there. Now we look at basically regeneration and repurposing. So this simple diagram that I came across with my team just explains, you know, essentially where, you know, sustainable is uncertain. It's in the middle. We're sustaining where we're at, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're actually further developing and actually going beyond to unbreak what we've already created as damage. I mean, are we all beyond the damage point, or can we start to kind of regenerate? So, you know, restorative and regeneration is a positive effect that will start to have positive effect on the environment and sustainability. We saw this through COVID and so forth, through pandemic, with the reduction in air travel, reduction in car travel. Suddenly nature starts to take over again. So it's given a breathing space in which it can actually come back to life. So I think having that in mind going forward with projects is understandable. So this could be a project that some of you might already know or maybe have visited. This is actually in Sharjah. This is the Al Fire Desert Retreat and Spa, which we did with Shuruk, the government developer in Sharjah. Now, this is a sort of a building which has an interesting history. There are two buildings that were redundant or built in the 1960s, redundant for about the last 40 years. The one on the top here was an old clinic, we understand, with the oldest petrol pump in the UAE, supposedly. And on the opposite side of the road, there was a grocery store, or had a series of small market stalls within this space. And this is on a transitional road running from Fujairah, from the east coast to Sharjah. And it was a key route going through the desert. So the client came to us and wanted to discuss about what could we do to bring this back to life? How could we utilize these buildings without sort of demolishing them? So for us, the key understanding was about creating something that was sensitive, but also quite brave in a sense of creating a repurposing of this project, bringing a new life to these old structures and creating them as a destination within the UAE to reveal the nature, to reveal the presence of being in the desert and being away from the cities, and to understand a connection with that. So it was very much a hands-on construction process. We did the design drawings, but we're very much active on site with the client and the contractor to bring this together. The important thing about this project is with the actual grocery store, we created a 5-bedroom lodge, which meant there was now a stay element, which brought in an idea of a repurposing of people using this as a hotel for a short stay, 2-3 nights. And then we actually decided with the client that we wanted to kind of create a third anchor, which was a saltwater spa. Now, this saltwater spa is actually quite primordial. It's very basic in a sense. So it's all saltwater treatments. There's no kind of major chemicals or no chlorine. It's almost self-operational. So there's minimal of maybe one person operating at any one time. And the freedom of which you can go and use it as a guest is in your own time. There's no necessary booking or ordering. It's really about a free flow, which is also a state of mentality about going back to what we call understated luxury. The other thing that's quite interesting about this is that we were contemporary in our nature, but we were also sensitive within scale with this project. We designed and made all of the furniture locally here in the UAE for the interiors of the particular lodge building itself, and just specified very durable timber exterior furniture that's beautifully aging outside. The saltwater spa became a destination that meant that people were going to take more time there, were going to spend more time there, and it also meant that they would come back. So that gives a longevity to the actual function and purposing of this building. So not just about changing the building into just something that just keeps it back to life, but sustaining it and hopefully growing on that, and creating a building that can last and be lived in and be used for years to come. What was interesting is that we were quite sort of key about making it clear between what is old and what is new. So everything that was in this project was about bringing new shading structures and new additions through Corten steel, where that was actually a man-made material that was actually organically sort of protecting and growing itself with its own rusting and its self-sustaining throughout its process as it's aged over time with the weather and conditions out there. The weather and conditions out there are very, very, very harsh, so everything needs to be very robustly detailed. And then the interiors of the rooms, the key was to try and bring as much natural light into them. There were small spaces, so hence why we were doing our own furniture, hence why we were also taking the materiality on the interior and outside. So this project really embodies about the idea of repurposing and also regeneration. And I think for us, this was one key project that we were able to showcase, not just within Sharjah, but this reached quite globally as a unique project in terms of the unexpected, something that was in the UAE that maybe hadn't been perceived on the outside before, or maybe for people that were here in the UAE that maybe hadn't spent as much time in the desert and truly understood the nature of the space. It was something that's a great opportunity, almost an oculus, to go and visit there and see this phenomenal landscape. And even with the restaurant building on the other side, it was this kind of old clinic that was quite small. So we built an extension on the back, which created a small restaurant that actually had this outdoor space and terrace overlooking the mountain range. Again, it was also about connecting with nature. The one thing that was very apparent out here is not just the landscape, but also the skyscape. And I think that this is one of those projects where it had a bigger purpose of just revealing the landscape more rather than the building being subversive to that. On the same sort of methodology as we talked about repurposing, we're also talking about regenerating. So this is a property in central London. This is a amalgamation of two adjoining houses. One, which is this one on a street in Belgravia, which is from about 1902. And then to the rear, there was a 1960s sort of very awkward shape mews house connecting to this. And they were independently not really usable anymore because of their small scale. So within this building that we're actually doing, we're creating an extension on the roof, but we're using CLT wood. So we're using structural cross-laminated timber rather than heavy steel or concrete in order to kind of restructure this building from its inside outwards. So again, using a sustainable material in a new way, exploring essentially a structural element that reduces the amount of material needed and also allows profiles to be quite thin. By loading this on top of the existing structure, we're able to kind of create a new residence that now becomes inhabitable again and actually can function and become usable as a space. So again, as some may know, in London, we don't have as much natural light as we do in the UAE, and we don't get blessed with as much sunshine. So daylight is important, and particularly north light, where you get this sort of ambient north light throughout the day, where you can actually light up a space quite well if you play with light down into its depths. So the staircase draws light down to the lower floors. We have a living space on the top with windows on two sides, views out to the roof terrace above. So this was always about trying to create something that was also quite sensitive to its actual context. It was something within a conservation area, so we had to be sensitive to the scale. And I think scale is important, as we talked about, between architecture and interior. So it doesn't always have to be overscaled. It just has to be well planned and well designed. So even getting in the basement, on the semi-basement, drawing in as much natural light as we could within this space to save on energy, to save on that, but also connects you as an inhabitant, as a resident with nature. What time of day it is, what understanding of your relationship with the building, with the daylight, in which way that works as well. So as you can see here, it sort of sits back from the street. It's almost very discreet in which it's done. It's sort of this new extension, as I talked about, is CLT construction using timber, so that we can kind of be very clean and neat and also minimal use of the materials to be able to use that on this roof terrace, and drawing in as much natural daylight as possible to save on energy usage and consumption. Now we talk a little bit about beyond sustainability. For me, this is also about our experimentation as a practice and our interest in light, as you probably heard me speak about in the previous projects. It's things that were really important for us, and understanding about the human connection between architecture and nature, and how we can use design and architecture to further that connection and to create buildings that actually enhance that connection with nature and wellness and the awareness of that as well. So this is a project, a quite unique project that's actually in Serbia in Eastern Europe. So this is a mountaintop air health retreat, and this was inspired by previous generations, actually, that would usually be prescribed from doctors if you had a respiratory or you had sort of an illness that needed sort of fresh air or nature to be able to recover. You were prescribed and could be prescribed to go to the mountains versus actually taking Western medicine. So the understanding about going to a certain altitude, about going just outside the city, about reconnecting with nature, is about this sort of understanding from a beyond sustainable sort of notion or a greenwash is that it's also about health and wellness. I mean, sustainability is about going beyond that and about actually moving into understanding, you know, what a building does for its occupants and how a building can be built according to that to increase both wellness and health benefits. So with this is a precast construction, so all off-site construction, modular in its sense. Again, low carbon concrete just because of the thermal mass properties of this being a more exposed element, but positioning this building on a crosswind so that we're encouraging cross ventilation, vegetation on the top as allotments, allowing people and allowing the building to sort of self-sustain its own growth of foods and small berries and crops, which actually gave it a purpose to go out there as a destination. And the whole idea is that this was reinvigorating something that had been lost, in a sense that this was something during the 70s, 80s, 90s that was a natural thing people felt they wanted to do on a weekend, was to go out to nature, sort of exit the city and go and rehabilitate. So I think the importance is not losing this connection as humans between nature as we go further and further into more digital realms and further into more dense cities. It's very important to sustain our own human beings and our needs, is actually to understand where we come from and our fundamental needs and how that can be translated through architecture. Now, just with other projects that then led from this or that lead to new projects, as I might say, these are two experimentation projects that we did. So installations in Dubai Design Week in 2018. Well, this project was attempting to reconnect people with their understanding of their circadian rhythms. And what I mean by that is this circadian light synthesis installation was for people to just become aware of their understanding between different times of the day. So natural sunlight in the morning at sunrise is very warm and ambient white warm light, which then goes to a very kind of bright light, 4,000, 5,000 Kelvin at midday, and then comes back to a more warmer, cooler time of day at the evening as sunset. Now that dictates our almost our endocrine system and actually connects us with being tired, being awake and going to bed and waking up. Now, disruptors of that are VDU screens, phone screens, things that move us away from our natural connection to what we are as beings. So within this project, we experimented with one pavilion, which was this one, which was purely lit by the sun path. So from 12 o'clock through till 6 p.m. in this position in D3, you saw the different strengths of sunlight, the impact of the colors coming across on both sides of which this was. So this particular pavilion on the left side was completely lit by daylight and shaded and also allowed for cross ventilation. The opposite one on the other side was actually recreating the exact same circadian synthesis in an artificial light. So it was an enclosed pavilion, but what we programmed it to do was an artificial light to actually change the color tone from the warm white in the morning to the bright white in the afternoon to the warm in the evening, which had the same effect on our brains and our sensitivity to light, showcasing that you could technically have human-centric lighting in your offices, in your home, that would also help with your rhythm of your daily routine and reconnect you back with your more fundamentals, rather than having a constant light throughout the day into the late evening, which disturbs your connection. So you can see in here, this artificial one was almost on a mimicry, following exactly what was happening in the fully naturally lit one, to communicate with people that this is an important aspect to understand that often gets forgotten. And then at night, the moonlight was actually the one that we created that was lighting this one as well. So it was about trying to do it in a very understated way, in a very passive way, for people to just question this as an installation, to spend a little bit more time, to sit in there and contemplate, not too much sort of describe, just about to discover. And then that was one thing that we really kind of were quite adamant and wanted to showcase, because we were starting to explore human-centric lighting in our office workplaces as well, knowing this knowledge and knowing this effect on the human being. And then finally, our most recent experiment as a continuation of an architect's ongoing research into light and architecture. For the 2021 Dubai Design Week, we collaborated with Cosentino to utilize their latest or their first carbon neutral material by creating an installation that further explored the connection with light and natural light phenomena. This project was developed to be fully demountable, to use minimal material where possible, to showcase that we were utilizing a low carbon concrete, a carbon neutral material, sorry. The structure itself and the carbon material, the sandstone material was actually standard sizes, so they could all be taken back and reused. The construction is supposed to be demountable and can be relocated in various places and all mechanical fixing. But what we also wanted to bring to this is actually understanding low-level light and some of the connection between light and its natural phenomena. So we utilize this as a very human scale, fully demountable structure that was actually it was a pinhole camera. It's camera obscura, so it's a full analog tool, no electricity, no lenses, no nothing. So it's actually bringing back the awareness to people of how our relationship with not just light, but our connection with image and our connection with how we see the world is actually embodied in this particular installation. The image you can see on the back here was generated by a 22mm hole at the front of the structure over a 3-meter distance to the back wall, creating a naturally occurring inverted image in full color of D3. Now, this is exactly what happens within your eye. This is what happens within the body of a camera. And it's to understand that these low light conditions, the way in which you perceive them, it takes time. Your eyes take time to adjust to low level light, but then you reveal these sort of natural light phenomena once you're in this space. So it's about just trying to connect people back to the basics again, the fundamentals of how we as human beings and how we as architects relate architecture and light and space and the emotional connections with these projects in order to further understand how things can do. So we're exploring about what is the world around you and our interest about, do you notice this? And can you feel it, or do you want to change it? So this particular structure, wherever it is placed, it will always draw in the immediate context in real time around you. And that is quite an interesting concept that we often must dismiss when you're just taking shots with your camera or passing through something that you maybe don't give it time to grow on you to understand further. But you can see here, just to kind of give an example, this was just taken with a phone camera. On the left-hand side, you can see the actual image inverted as it was, but when you flip it over, you can see the actual image and understand that we've got the sky, we've got the buildings of D3, we'd actually got the central structure that was in the main plaza during Dubai Design Week. And you can see that here on the right side, and just how this very simplified structure that was sort of easily placed and easily demountable and relocated as we planned for the next few months to be in different places, to then reveal these different contexts around you. So I think it's actually, in summary, it was just our progression and our interest as a practice by being based in Dubai, a very progressive city, a very central hub of which we work from, and here also, and also in London, but by actually working in other areas of the world and understanding these things, we as a practice believe in our processes, and we follow a process with each of our projects that understandably reveals a different project, but there is a continuum through that, which is usually about detail, materials, local materials, understanding building techniques, reinterpreting those with a global understanding to bring something new to a place in which we should be transforming it and giving new ideas to people within different areas we're working with in a collaborative way. But then by using these different understandings from tropical context to mountain context to desert context, and then reiterating those within our experimentations and understanding how light affects buildings and how that then affects the human nature in which we can go, is beyond sustainability. Because I always believe, in a way, going back to the fundamentals of why we create buildings, for what purpose do we do with those projects, why are those commissions happening, we should always engage as much as we can to explore the beyond just delivering, about contributing and seeing beyond the day-to-day about how this can make a big impact going further forward. And then this is just a final slide just showing you exactly how this particular material was reacting again within the surrounding reflective material, to the buildings around it, and just a key simple mechanical construction. So it was almost a construction that was made mathematically, and also through the parameters that we set within the size of the materials, in order to make a project that was, a pavilion, which is not necessarily a sustainable approach, but by using that as a tool to actually engage with people, to hope that that would then interpret things and make people think beyond just the structure as being an edifice in this space. Hopefully that was some interesting dialogue for you there.
A lot of food for thought there, Jonathan, definitely. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you. I've already gone on and joined Harding Boutique Hotel online. So hopefully I'll be there soon. If you've got any questions or comments for Jonathan, please unmute or raise your hand, or throw them into the chat forum, and we will ask Jonathan. I can kick off. You clearly have changed your approach over the years to look at beyond sustainability, and I love that, beyond sustainability. Absolutely, it should be about regeneration and restoration. But you've obviously, in that change, you have changed the way you work. Does sustainability require a significant change of approach for the sector, not just individual architects like yourself, but do we need to compromise, or do we need to change in order to truly go beyond sustainability as a society?
I think from our experience, and particularly since relocating to Dubai and understanding this, we like to keep ourselves fresh by going and challenging ourselves, working in these unique contexts. I mean, to be honest, we're very lucky to get these opportunities to work in the likes of Sri Lanka, Nairobi, Uganda, London, Serbia, Montenegro, places which keeps us on our toes, because it's not next door. I mean, we are working a lot in the GCC, but it makes us understand that we can't do something here that just translates there. It doesn't work like that. And the only way to keep this sort of sustained, or this kind of relevance, is to believe in an approach. So the approach for us goes back to passive design, orientation, mass, available local materials. What's the purpose? What's the higher purpose of the building? What can it contribute? For example, with Harding Boutique Hotel, we knew that we couldn't sort of do advanced construction technology, not just because it was in Sri Lanka. I mean, it was actually 2.5 hours south of Colombo. So where they had far more technological building methods in Colombo as the country's capital, they don't have that on the south coast. And what we were trying to do is to take the vernacular of the construction industry, of what they were working with, but then advance that through our architectural design approach by translating this to a way in which could be easily understood and work together in a very collaborative way. And that, for us as designers, is actually very challenging as architects, because every new project is a new challenge. Mm-hmm. But that is what keeps it exciting for me and my team. And by doing that, as I said before, by keeping these various different typologies, so it's not just hotels or residential or cultural, we're constantly learning from all these different aspects. And what I might take from a private residence might then go into a hotel. What we take from a hotel might then translate into a new type of workspace. So I think it's always about constantly learning and evolving, and getting back to what you really believe in and what you believe in which you're working with your clients. And it's also about understanding not just the building, but it's also about getting to know what's the purpose. Challenging the purpose of that commission, discussing with the client what are the needs, what is the relevance of that project within that context, and what does it contribute. So with Harding as well, we were using local materials, local craftsmen, employing, so Paul, who owns the hotel now, has a staff of 12 local team running the hotel from Ahangama and Galle South Coast on Sri Lanka. And it brings the character, it brings the purpose of that project. It's an authentic, genuine destination hospitality. It's not transposed. And I believe that that is something that we as a practice really are very passionate about. And I think that through this time and through these different projects has allowed us to have confidence to take on these projects where we're not in the back garden of that place. And I think it's something that we actually feel is looking at the fundamentals and then understanding the technology of which you can work with will inherently give life beyond a short period and give this project or give projects a longevity in terms of understanding climate control and understanding durability and what you can produce in each of these places.
Fantastic. Questions, anyone? Come on, one of you will unmute. Okay, I'm going to throw in another one. Jonathan, my second question to you is, time is obviously a very precious commodity. Time is money at the end of the day. How do you, within the confines of a project, get to understand the local context to such an extent that you can apply it in the detail you do? I mean, you know, obviously places, cities where we live and work, where you live and work, Dubai and London, may be easier. But how do you start when you go to Sri Lanka or when you go to Serbia or Saudi, for example? How do you really get a fully rounded understanding of the local context in order to move forward? Is there a formula?
There is, and it's very much from, it's just my understanding of the role of the architect. It's about the lead design, it's about the communicator between the client and the team being a wider collaboration across, you know, structural design, M&E or MEP design, landscape design, environmental design, all of those things. So when we're doing projects in new locations, we often sort of do the first initial sort of desktop researching, understanding of where we want to go, what we're doing, what's the purpose of the project, what does the client want to do. And then soon after, we actually go there, but with the intention of having a locally based team. Now, we would typically do that with a team that's structure, local, or M&E services, perhaps landscape, because each of those elements are very site specific or very local specific. I mean, it's about what's the available technology, what's the climate, so how do you cool or heat a building locally, or how can you to do that? Structural, you know, what kind of materials or how can you span with the different technologies that are available within that particular location? And then also with landscape, you know, when you're talking about landscapes in nature, but also looking at indigenous local planting, looking at sort of reduction in need for irrigation. So when we're putting together a team, a design team, obviously it's not just us. We would take care of the architecture and the interior for the client, but then we have a much wider consultancy base of which we work and choose and handpick the right teams to work with. So within that, within Sri Lanka, or within that and in Nairobi, as well as in Uganda, it's about having someone on the reciprocating side and then using the design process in a very rigorous way through, you know, design, sketching, detailed drawings, 3D modeling, and very much a dialogue. It's very important, and obviously face-to-face, if not video, as much as possible, to communicate that through and to understand that whatever you don't draw, whatever you don't specify is open to interpretation. So you need to make sure that what you're creating is a very clear manual. I think that's why I tried to show with Harding. The visuals that were created is identical idea of what the 3D model was and all the drawings that were produced that then resulted in a final result, which is exactly the same. And that was a process. It took time, but it was fluid. It was far fluid than some projects that are maybe on your doorstep, because you're thinking about that and you know that's a critical thing that you need to kind of keep hold of as a team. And by doing that, it keeps you on your toes and you make sure that you're making those critical decisions in that design period, so that when it goes to site, a lot of the answers have already been done. And then when you're in a dialogue with the builder, contractor, and everyone else on site, it's very easy to refer, it's very easy to clarify things, to just make things as they are. So, you know, time is a very important thing, and particularly within the design process when working on projects like this, to make sure you cover as many bases, as much detail as possible, to give that project the biggest step up that it can actually be delivered to what was promised with the client.
Anyone want to step in here, ladies and gentlemen?
Lisa, I do have a question, if you don't mind.
Ahlan wa sahlan, Mohammed. Yalla.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Jonathan. Great presentation, great work. Definitely one of the top architects in the region. My question is about the choice of selection of materials. What's really your motive behind your decisions about choosing certain materials? Of course, beyond their structural specifications. And the second question is, have you considered repurposed and recycled materials as an elegant top-tier architecture and design element or materials? Or have you relied on more man-made manufactured materials?
To go with your sort of first question about materiality, a lot of it comes down to, so the first choice of material is obviously about where you're building. And to be fair, there's certain hot climates, they need mass, they need density, and it's whatever you feel. It's like your inherent response to how you feel you would want in that particular place. So for example, you're not going to make a light steel glassy building in the desert because it would just feel too, it wouldn't have the robustness, it wouldn't have the density, it wouldn't have the mass. There was too much transparency to allow that to overheat. But when you're working with certain conditions, there are this inherent need to get to those fundamental base of materials. So if you're looking at a sort of stone construction, for example, so Amman is very much known for stonework, and lots of kind of, stone is a structural element as it has been used centuries and centuries. And that's now coming back into a more familiar construction methodology from a structural level of stone, which is happening on some projects in London as well. But I think when you're kind of understanding about those materials, it depends on where you're also working. So you have to understand the aspects. So we talked about orientation and the passive design approach. So if you want to get as much daylight in from a particular space, you want to be looking at what materials and what you're going to use in terms of that. I think rain, we don't get a huge amount of that in the UAE, but you get a lot of that in Sri Lanka, and you get a lot of that in Nairobi and Kenya, in Uganda. So it's also about looking at materials that can last, and also materials that can also sustain seasons. So in Serbia, you have snow, so it goes down to -5, -10 sometimes. In summer, it can go to +40. So I think a lot of that climate environment dictates the fundamental structural element of those particular buildings to state from. I personally believe that structure should not be something that's hidden. I believe in if it's actually a proper collaborative approach, that structure can be part and expressed in the architecture itself. So within a lot of our projects, we try to work closely with our engineering so that structure becomes a very beautiful mechanical element as a part of that architecture. So then you're choosing and looking at the detail carefully with those, how that works. And then when you're looking at recycled material or repurposing material, I mean, we often then tie that with where we are working, for example. So a lot of the wood that was in the Sri Lanka project was locally sourced, if not all of it. And working with that particular wood that's kind of a hard wood, but not hard enough to be exterior, with parts interior. So understanding those elements and working with the local craftsmen and working with them, how they work the wood, and then seeing how they can then challenge those working with those types of things. I think you're seeing also when you terms in, looking at the idea of luxury and featuring materials that are recycled, there are some great sort of interior architects and designers now that are repurposing, recycled materials and giving them much higher grade finish, giving them much a replacement to the marbles and glasses that you might sort of find. And I think that that can only get better. I find that that's more on the interiors, where it's something that has sort of almost a jewel-like experience when you're bringing together some plastics, for example, or some fiberglass pieces that you're finding that actually can be explored depending on who. But I often find that those types of things are sometimes you want to collaborate with someone that's exploring and taking in the R&D of that material. And if that becomes something that's part and parcel of the project, I think it's quite exciting. But I think architects should be as much aware as they can be of new materials. But I think you should step outside the realm and see what other people are doing in different types of industries to see where you can bring those new materials into collaboration, perhaps in projects of which can actually have this sort of luxurious sort of celebratedness within that, which then inherently, like you mentioned, brings in a focus and then gives you sort of a new reveal of what those materials can be. And I really hope that is something that we do when going forward. It doesn't have to be the classics, let's say.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mohammed. Everyone's saying what a brilliant presentation you gave, and you did. But you paint a very rosy picture of the industry's enthusiasm for embracing beyond sustainability. And then we all live in the real world, Jonathan. We know that that's not always quite true. My Lima's question, I should say, is, where do you draw the line with clients, suppliers, and any other parties involved when they start to move away from that sustainability requirement?
That's a very good question. It's something that I'm sure every single architect and designer faces. The trick is to have it as something that cannot be replaced. You inherit that within the actual build. You know, for example, the DQ project in Saudi, you know, we wanted to use rammed earth from the get-go, and we felt that it was quite appropriate for the setting. It was also achievable within the actual soil earth makeup that was in that area, and it became a predominant language for the project. So if that was removed, the project would be completely different, and it would just be a painted finished wall, which wouldn't have the same inherent materiality to it, and the composition, and also the natural kind of undulation that it created. We also got the buy-in from the authorities because they fell in love with that idea as well. So I think it's, in a way, it's about understanding. It's not just something that's applied. I never really liked the idea of doing a building and then decorating it in sort of sustainable greenwash materials, or, you know, essentially kind of turbines or something, or too much solar panels or something, where actually a lot of that can already be offset by just positioning the building correctly according to the sun path, giving the natural ventilation where you can do that, creating overhanging shading where you need it, and then looking at the mass versus transparency. So if you do all of that, then you're giving yourself an advantage to be able to have that flexibility, to have that ongoing dialogue about those different materials and the challenges, but inherently having 2 or 3 options that you discuss with the client. And also, you know, not all materials are expensive. I mean, technically, you know, rammed earth is free, other than getting it out sort of the local ground. It's just a different technique. Yet the technique of doing rammed earth is very much similar to pouring concrete. It's just, it needs to be spoken about and sort of not educated in a patronizing way, but just shown by some experts how to do that. And then it's inherently just continued through the process. So we've seen that in Saudi, and it's been great to see already.
As you say, integrate it so it is irreplaceable, because at the end of the day, your carbon footprint is irreplaceable to a certain extent as well. The damage that we are bringing to the planet is irreplaceable. So any sustainability or beyond sustainability elements need to be as integral as possible.
I think one thing is also about, if you have a project that is existing and the first topic is demolition, is to first explore what can you do with the existing, even if the client's sort of insisting and saying, look, I want to get this demolished, I want to start again. Actually, the greatest architecture comes from when you're working with something very tangible, very complicated, very challenging, and that makes you think a lot harder, and you often get a lot more out of the project and a lot more challenging, rather than always starting with a clean slate.
Yes, yeah. And thus the challenge begins. Any questions, anyone? Oh, people have got their hands up. Okay, Rima Al-Maheri. Please ask your question. If you could unmute yourself, Rima. No? Rima, do you want to ask a question? Okay, we'll turn to Mohammed. Mohammed, I saw you earlier. You wanted to ask a question, Mohammed Ziad.
Hi, sir. Mohammed Ziad. I'm an architecture graduate from India. I've been following you on social media for quite some time, and I love all your works. Especially, I was excited about the Sri Lankan projects that you are working on. So you have talked about the working in a different context. So I was just curious to know what were the methods you adopted to get a better understanding of the context. Like Sri Lanka itself have a strong architecture language of tropical modernism set by all the master architects, Geoffrey Bauer, Palinda Kanagara, etc. So I'm just curious, what were the process you followed in terms of understanding the context and which all architects were your local architects were inspiration in your work, something like that.
It's a good question, actually. There's a very interesting story about Harding Boutique Hotel. So the client is a Australian Sri Lankan. His mother is from the Sri Lankan side, and his great uncle was the first hotelier to commission Geoffrey Bauer to build a hotel in Sri Lanka. So the client actually had sort of this kind of continuum and this relationship between hospitality, Geoffrey Bauer, and Sri Lanka, even though he'd not grown up in Sri Lanka itself, and spent quite a lot of time there as a child, and got a bit of a buzz and a bit of a passion for actually doing that. So his destined project was to try and build a small hotel that he could run and continue the sort of the legacy under which his great uncle had actually started in this collaboration with Geoffrey Bauer. And that was one of the sort of hooks and the stories that really got me excited about this project, because we'd already started working in Sri Lanka on another project on a private villa further down the south coast. And I'd been and toured and visited quite a lot of Geoffrey's work, from the early works that were more vernacular with overhangs to the slightly more kind of modernist and tropical modernism that his later work reflected. I think with this particular project that we did at Harding, it very much takes on this sort of tropical modernism and relates a little bit to the sort of brutalist movement as well, purely because it's actually on coast. It needs to sustain such harsh salt conditions and the way in which the building is done, but also by looking at that framing views, the way in which we've got natural cross ventilation where we can, so that when you stand in the staircase, at whatever time of the day, whatever time of year, it's always ventilating, it's always feeling very fresh, like a lot of Bauer's work initially was. Other than we don't have a very big landscape to work in that project, what was always quite interesting is about framing. So with Geoffrey Bauer, he would always frame your destination to move to the next room or across a courtyard into the next room, and then have something as a destination, which is almost like your eyes are drawn to the brightest point. It's almost like a self-orientation mode through that. So within this project, we are constantly creating the next framing, even moving through the building, but in order to take you vertical. So the staircase is purposely open, but then has these pockets where you frame and you look back out and you see into the tropics or over towards the ocean or back towards town. So for us, we were really interpreting that, and I've probably got a few Bauer books behind me. I think, yeah, there's Beyond Bauer on that one, as well as some Studio Mumbai work from India. So we're very much aware and very much understand some of the great architects and how we get a chance to understand their purposing and what they created in their time and in their generation.
Brilliant question from Mohammed. Rima, I understand Rima had a little problem with her audio earlier. Let's see if Rima can ask her question now.
I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to thank you all for the talk today. It was really interesting, very insightful. And my question for Jonathan actually was, I'm very interested in how you started. A lot of us young designers find it extremely intimidating, even if we do get like freelance opportunities and so on, to tackle them. We mainly focus on much smaller projects. But when I look at the projects that you guys tackled within your practice, it's very interesting that they're very diverse and they're in a lot of different locations. So what were your beginnings like? What would your advice be for us? Just sort of like wanted to put that out.
Yeah, I you know, it kind of comes through a passion. For me personally, I mean, the practice that I set up was purely out of passion, wanting to do the work and work on the projects that are really interested me and then really interested the team that we've built around us. And I think it's about finding your own position and about finding your own understanding and what you truly believe in as an architect and a designer, you can only get that through experience. I mean, I was at the Bartlett School in London. I worked then. I was very lucky to come out and work very much hands-on in a practice when I first graduated and worked on some built buildings. The transition to me was always about the purpose of architecture is the design is a process to getting to something built. Yes, the design can always be experimental. You can challenge, you can provoke ideas like we've been doing with some of our installations that do end up in a physical form so that people can interact. But for me, architecture and design is about trying to create something and do something that has a purpose and a relevance and follow that process through to the completion. Now, we as a practice and myself, I'm very much hands-on and engaged from that start conversation with that client to handing over the key and going beyond that and seeing the place come to life, seeing that home come to life, or seeing the sort of the hotel come to life. So I think when I moved to Dubai, it was quite a different challenge for me because I felt that I was looking for something that maybe I felt missing. And I then reconnected with my passion for not doing the big mega projects that were never necessarily going to get realized, or things that were never really going to see the end of day that you might see for another 5, 10, 15 years, if that, or not having that personal connection with that end-to-end client. So we created our practice where we could bring both architecture and interiors together, which was a deep passion of mine, meaning that within our clients, we can really work at all different design scales with them. And we try to do as many passion projects, or let's call it passion projects, but just projects that we love. And that's what we like to do because it keeps us on our toes and it gets us to work in these most incredible landscapes and contexts on these most unique projects. It's hard work. I'm not going to say it's not. It really is hard work, but it's rewarding. And when you kind of connect with clients and you understand what they want to do, and if they've got the vision that you share, and you can have this very close sort of dialogue and almost a friendship around those projects and this shared vision and passion for the project, you're very lucky. And we've been very lucky on a few occasions to be able to do those things. So I think it's just keep pursuing understanding. Don't get distracted. Try to keep focused about what you believe in. Sort of work on your own skills. Collaborate where you feel that you want to explore new realms. Read, listen, look, always be aware around you, and just sort of follow it, and treat it as a passion if that is what you believe in. That's kind of how we like to work and like to continue to work, hopefully, with our projects and our clients.
Wonderful.
That's perfect. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rima. I think any other final questions before we wrap up? I'm going to throw one in here, bringing it back to the UAE. After Al Fire, what have you learned that you will apply in a new way, possibly, in your next project here in the UAE?
It's a good question, Lisa. I think that project, we're doing a number of other projects that sort of are looking at repurposing and bringing back to life old structures. I have a passion for the work that's been undertaken in Sharjah, particularly where there is an appreciation for layering, for kind of historic but not pastiche, bringing things in a contemporary way. So I think what was very important about Al Fire is scale. The project was beyond a tiny scale for any understood hotel. It was 5 bedrooms. We actually worked within the existing structure and literally made minor extensions to create just inhabitable space, but we didn't overdevelop it. I think what we're also quite key in that project was a balance. It's heritage, it's come from somewhere else, it's been layered. This was the 1960s, almost modernist movement that was done by the British then. And then we've taken on that new realm where we've contrasted it to show this layering to make people understand how that building has been further adapted, and to show that there's been some love given back to that building and that it has got life beyond just been something that was created just a few years ago. what was really intriguing for me was going back to that project when we actually photographed it with the photographer Fernando Guerra, and we spent 2 days there solid, from morning sunrise to evening sunset, and the building is just subservient to the landscape. It's completely at awe to the landscape and the skyscape above. And what I really realized, and what we'd actually made these decisions of design decisions, is that we were constantly connecting in every single aperture, every window, every vertical, every horizontal, with what was happening outside. And it made me really understand that essentially, like you said before, time, nature, connection with nature, human reliance and requirements of circadian light, understanding, are the most luxurious things you can have, in a very primordial, back to basics way. You know, everyone strives for, you know, 6-7 star luxury. I get it, but there is something beautiful in the antithesis. So I always quite liked that project, and that really revealed to us that actually had a really huge value as a project that was very relatively quite simple, but it had a huge connection with the nature, that it revealed something new to me that I didn't know of the UAE.
When you say it's in awe of the landscape, it absolutely is. I drive past it regularly at the weekend, and it is not dwarfed. Dwarfed is the wrong word. It's a symbiosis, but it is in respect of the surrounding environment, and particularly the mountains of around it. Absolutely fantastic.
Phenomenal setting, yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're going to pull it to a close now, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. And also, I can't believe that we've known each other for almost 10 years now.
Wow.
I'm going to go and get some Botox. Thank you very much for an incredible presentation. I think we've all been inspired. Now it's not about sustainability anymore. It's about beyond sustainability, the regeneration and the restoration. Thank you, Jonathan Ashmore. You can follow him and ANARCHITECT online. You can also follow Tashkeel.org and at Tashkeel Studio. We'll be having another Tashkeel Talk in the new year, in January. And please do visit us here in Nad Al Shiba. We've got a phenomenal exhibition of 10 years of product design in the UAE. And if you have nothing to do tomorrow or Thursday, why not pop along to the World Creative Economy Conference that's taking place at Dubai Exhibition Centre at Expo 2020. It's running from 10 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock in the evening, and it is free to enter. All you have to do is register online at wcce.ae, and there's fantastic people speaking throughout the day. Not as fantastic as Jonathan, but similarly inspirational. From all of us, thank you very much, and hopefully see you next time at the next Tashkeel Talk.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.